It's my pleasure. Please continue. They say that Akatosh appeared and killed Mehrunes Dagon, right in the middle of the Temple of the One. Do you believe it? Armor, weapons, I have it all. How may I help you? You've made a... You got... That's a fair... Another satisfied customer. Farewell. Good day. May I interest you in some of my fine wares? A good... You drop... That's a... You got... A That's a good... A good... That seems a... Come back and see me again. Take care.
Go ahead.
You were Martin's friend, weren't you? You were fortunate to have known him. Only quality goods for sale here. What can I interest you in? A fun. You gotta... You drop... That's a And next? That's more than... And excellent. That seems a fair... I appreciate your business.
Hello everyone, welcome back to my stream. Tonight we're going to finish the game finally by reading all the Romanian lore. Alright, here we go. we got Mystery of Talara, Volume 3, 4, and 5, Red Book of Riddles. Well, I've already read that, so it's not that. Let's read The Wolf Queen, Volume 3. Wolf Queen, Book 3 by Wavian Jarth, from the pen of the 1st century 3rd era sage Montukai, 3rd era 98. The Emperor Pelagius Septim II died a few weeks before the end of the year, on the 15th of Evening Star during the festival of North Wind's Prayer, which was considered a bad omen for the Empire. He had ruled over a difficult 17 years. In order to fill the bankrupt treasury, Pelagius had dismissed the Elder Council, forcing them to buy back their positions. Several good but poor councillors had been lost. Many say the Emperor had died as a result of being poisoned by a vengeful former council member. His children came to attend his funeral and the coronation of the next emperor. His youngest son, Prince Magnus, 19 years of age, arrived from Almalexia, where he had been a councillor to the royal court. 21-year-old Prince Sepphoris arrived from Gilane with his Redguard bride, Queen Bianchi. Prince Antiochus, 43 years of age, the eldest child and heir presumptive, had been with his father in the imperial city. The last to appear was his only daughter, Potema, the so-called Wolf Queen of Solitude. 30 years old and radiantly beautiful, she arrived with a magnificent entourage, accompanied by her husband, the elderly King Mantiarco, and her year-old son, Uriel. All expected Antiochus to assume the throne of the empire, but no one knew what to expect from the Wolf Queen. 3rd era 99. Lord Vulcan has been bringing several men to your sister's chambers late at night every night this week, offered the spy master. Perhaps if her husband were made aware. My sister is a devotee of the conqueror gods Rimmon and Talos, not the love goddess Dibella. She is plotting with those men, not having orgies with them. I'd wager I've slept with more men than she has, left Antiochus and then grew serious. She's behind the delay of the council offering me the crown. I know it. 6 weeks now. They say they need to update records and prepare for the coronation. I'm the emperor, crown me and to oblivion with the formalities. Your sister is surely no friend of yours, your majesty, but there are other factors at play. Do not forget how your father treated the council. It is they who need following, and if need be, strong convincing. The spy master added with a suggestive stab of his dagger. Do so, but keep your eye on the damnable Wolf Queen as well. You know where to find me. At which brothel, your highness? Inquired the spy master. Today, being Freda's, I'll be at the Cat and Goblin. The spy master noted in his report that night that Queen Potema had no visitors, for she was dining across the imperial garden at the Blue Palace with her mother, the Dowager Empress Quintilla. It was a warm night for wintertide and surprisingly cloudless, though the day had been stormy. The saturated ground could not take any more, so the formal structured gardens looked as if they had been glazed with water. The two women took their wine to the wide balcony to look over the grounds. I believe you are trying to sabotage your half-brother's coronation, said Quintilla, not looking at her daughter. Potema saw how the years had not so much wrinkled her mother's faded her like the sun on a stone. It's not true, said Potema, but would it bother you very much if it were true? Antiochus is not my son. He was 11 years old when I married your father, and we've never been close. I think that being heir presumptive has stunted his growth. He is old enough to have a family with grown children, and yet he spends all his time at debauchery and fornication. He will not make a very good emperor. Quintilla sighed and then turned to Potema. But it is bad for the family for seeds of discontent to be sown. It is easy to divide up into factions, but very difficult to unite again. I fear for the future of the empire. Those sound like the words, "Are you by any chance dying, mother?" "I've read the omens," said Quintilla with a faint, ironic smile. "Don't forget, I was renowned sorceress in Camlorn. I will dead in a few months' time, and then, not a year later, your husband will die. I only regret that I will not live to see your child Uriel assume the throne of Solitude." Have you seen whether Potema stopped not wanting to reveal too many of her plans even to a dying woman? Whether he will be an emperor? I know the answer to that too, daughter. Don't fear, you'll live to see the answer, one way or the other. I have a gift for him when he is of age. The Dowager Empress removed the necklace with a single great yellow gem from around her neck. It is a soul gem infused with the spirit of a great werewolf your father and I defeated in battle 36 years ago. I have enchanted it with spells from the School of Illusion, so its wearer may charm whoever he chooses. An important skill for a king. And an emperor, said Potema, taking the necklace. Thank you, mother. An hour later, passing the black branches of the sculpted dowad shrubs, Potema noticed a dark figure which vanished into the shadows under the eaves at her approach. She had noticed people following her before. It was one of the hazards of life in the imperial court, but this man was too close to her chambers. She slipped the necklace around her neck. "Come out when I see you," she commanded. The man emerged from the shadows, a dark little fellow of middle age dressed in black dyed goatskin. His eyes were fixed, frozen under her spell. "Who do you work for?" "Prince Antiochus is my master," he said in a dead voice. "I am his spy." A plan formed. "Is the prince in his study?" "No, milady." "And you have access?" "Yes, milady." Potema smiled widely. She had him. "Lead the way." The next morning the storm reappeared in all its fury. The pelting on the walls and ceilings was agony to Antiochus, who was discovering that he no longer had his youthful immunity to a late night of hard drinking. He shoved hard against the Argonian wench sharing his bed. "Make yourself useful and close the window," he moaned. No sooner had the window been bolted than there was a knock at the door. It was the spy master. He smiled at the prince and handed him a sheet of paper. "What is this?" Antiochus squinted his eyes. "I must still be drunk, it looks like orcish." "I think you will find it useful, your majesty. Your sister is here to see you." Antiochus considered getting dressed or sending his bedmaid out, but thought better of it. Show her in, let her be scandalized. If Potema was scandalized, she did not show it. Swathed in orange and silver silk, she entered the room with a triumphant smile, followed by the man mountain Lord Woken. "Dear brother, I spoke to my mother last night and she advised me very wisely. She said I should not battle with you in public for the good of our family and the empire. Therefore," she said, producing from the folds of her robe a piece of paper, "I am offering you a choice." "A choice?" said Antiochus, returning to her smile. That does sound friendly. "Abdicate your rights to the imperial throne voluntarily, and there is no need for me to show the council this," Potema said, handing her brother the letter. "It is a letter with your seal on it, saying that you knew that your father was not Pelagius Septim II, but the royal steward Fondolf. Now, before you deny writing the letter, you cannot deny the rumors. Know that the Imperial Council will believe that your father, the old fool, was quite capable of being cuckolded. Whether it's true or not, or whether the letter is a forgery or not, the scandal of it would ruin your chances of being the emperor." Antiochus' face had gone wide with fury. "Don't fear, brother," said Potema, taking back the letter from his shaking hands. "I will see to it that you have a very comfortable life and all the horse your heart or any other organ desires." Suddenly Antiochus laughed. He looked over at his spy master and winked. "I remember when you broke into my stash of Cogita Erotica and blackmailed me. That was so close to 20 years ago. You've got better locks now, you must have noticed. It must have killed you that you couldn't use your own skills to get what you wanted." Potema merely smiled. It didn't matter. She had him. "You must have charmed my servant here into getting you into my study to use my seal." Antiochus smirked. "A spell, perhaps, from your mother, the witch?" Potema continued to smile. Her brother was cleverer than she thought. "Did you know that charm spells, even powerful ones, only last so long?" "Of course you didn't. You never were one for magic. Let me tell you, a generous salary is a stronger motivation for keeping a servant in the long run, sister." Antiochus took out his own sheet of paper. "Now I have a choice for you." "What is that?" said Potema, her smile faltering. "It looks like nonsense, but if you know what you're looking for, it's very clear. It's a practice sheet. Your handwriting attempting to look like my handwriting. It's a good gift you have. I wonder if you haven't done this before, imitating another person's handwriting. I understand the letter was found from your husband's dead wife saying that his first son was a bastard. I wonder if you wrote that letter. I wonder if I show this evidence of your gift to your husband, whether he would believe you wrote that letter." In the future, dear Wolf Queen, don't play the same trap twice. Potema shook her head, furious, unable to speak. Give me your forgery and go take a walk in the rain, and then, later today, unhatch whatever other plots you have to keep me from this road. Antiochus fixed his eyes on Potemas. I will be Emperor, Wolf Queen, now go. Potema handed her brother the letter and left the room. For a few moments, out in the hallway, she said nothing. She merely glared at the silvers of rainwater dripping down the marble wall from a tiny, unseen crack. Yes, you will, brother, she said, but not for very long. The Wolf Queen, Book 8 by Weoin Jarth, from the pen of Inzolicus, 2nd century sage, 3rd year 127. Following the Battle of Ichidag, the Emperor Uriel Septimius III was captured, and before he was able to be brought to his uncle's castle in the Hammerfell kingdom of Ghislaine, he met his death at the hands of an angry mob. This uncle, Sepphoris, was thereafter proclaimed emperor and rode to the imperial city. The troops formerly loyal to Emperor Uriel and his mother, the Wolf Queen Potema, pledged themselves to the new emperor in returning for their support. The nobility of Skyrim, High Rock, Hammerfell, the Somerset Isle, Valenwood, Blackmarsh and Morrowind demanded and received a new level of autonomy and independence from the Empire. The War of the Red Diamond was at an end. Potema continued to fight a losing battle, her area of influence dwindling and dwindling until only her Kingdom of Solitude remained in her power. She summoned Daedra to fight for her, had her necromancers resurrect her fallen enemies as undead warriors, and mounted attack after attack on the forces of her brothers, the Emperor Sepphoris Septim I and King Magnus of Lilmoth. Her allies began leaving her as her madness grew, and her only companions were the zombies and skeletons she had amassed over the years. The Kingdom of Solitude became a land of death, story of the ancient Wolf Queen being awaited by rotting skeletal chambermaids and holding war plans with vampiric generals terrified her subjects. 3rd era, 137. Magnus opened up the small window in his room. For the first time in weeks he heard the sound of a city, carts squeaking, horses clopping over the cobblestones, and somewhere a child laughing. Yo, bro! He smiled as he returned to his bedside to wash his face and finish dressing. There was a distinctive knock on the door. "Come in, pal," he said. Pelagius bounded into the room. It was obvious that he had been up for hours. Magnus marveled at his energy and wondered how much longer battles would last if they were run by 12-year-old boys. "Did you see outside yet?" Pelagius asked. "All the townspeople have come back. There are shops and a mages guild, and down by the harbor I see 100 shops coming from all over the place. They don't have to be afraid anymore. We've taken care of all the zombies and ghosts that used to be their neighbors, and they know it's safe to come back." "Is Uncle Sepphoris going to turn into a zombie when he dies?" asked Pelagius. "I wouldn't put that past him," laughed Magnus. "Well, why do you ask?" "I heard some people saying that he was old and sick," said Pelagius. "He's not that old," said Magnus. "He's 60 years old. That's just 2 years older than I." "And how old is Aunt Potema?" asked Pelagius. 70, said Magnus, "and yes, that is old. Any more questions will have to wait. I have to go meet with the commander now, but we can talk at supper. You can make yourself busy and not get into any trouble?" "Yes, sir," said Pelagius. He understood that his father had to continue to hold siege on Aunt Potema's castle. After they took it over and locked her up, they would move out of the inn and into the castle. Pelagius was not looking forward to that. The whole town had a funny, sweet dead smell, but he could not get even as close as the castle moat without gagging from the stench. They could dump a million flowers on the place and it wouldn't make any difference at all. He walked through the city for hours, buying some food and then some ribbons for his sister and mother back in Lilmoth. He thought about who else he needed to buy gifts for and was stumped. All his cousins, the children of Uncle Sepphoris, Uncle Antiochus and Aunt Potema, had died during the war, some of them in battle and some of them during the famines because so many crops had been burned. Aunt Bianchi had died last year. There was only he, his mother, his sister, his father, and his uncle the Emperor left, and Aunt Potema, but she didn't really count. When he came upon the Mages Guild earlier that morning, he had decided not to go in. Those places always spooked him with their strange smoke and crystals and old books. This time, it occurred to Pelagius that he might buy a gift for Uncle Sepphoris, a souvenir of Solitude's Mages Guild. An old woman was having trouble with the front door, so Pelagius opened it for her. "Thank you," she said. She was easily the oldest thing he had ever seen. Her face looked like an old rotted apple frame with a wild whirl of bright white hair. He instinctively moved away from her gnarled talon when she started to pat him on the head. But there was a gem around her neck that immediately fascinated him. It was a single bright yellow jewel, but it almost looked there was something trapped within. When the light hit it from the candles, it brought out the form of a four-legged beast pacing. "It's a soul gem," she said, "infused with the spirit of a great demon werewolf. It was enchanted long ago with the power to charm people, but I have been thinking about giving it another spell, perhaps something from the School of Alteration, like lock or shield." She paused and looked at the boy carefully with yellowed, rheumy eyes. "You look familiar to me, boy. What's your name?" "Pelagius," he said. He normally would have said Prince Pelagius, but he was told not to draw attention to himself while in town. "I used to know someone named Pelagius," the old woman said, and slowly smiled. "Are you alone, Pelagius?" "My father is with the army, storming the castle, but he'll be back when the walls have been breached." "Which I dare say won't take too much longer," sighed the old woman. "Nothing, no matters how well built, tends to last. Are you buying something in the Mages Guild?" "I wanted to buy a gift for my uncle," said Pelagius, "but I don't know if I have enough gold." The old woman left the boy to look over the wares while she went to the guild enchanter. He was a young Nord, ambitious and new to the Kingdom of Solitude. It took little persuasion and a lot of gold to convince him to remove the charm spell from the soul gem and imbue it with a powerful curse, a slow poison that would drain wisdom from its wearer year by year until he or she lost all reason. She also purchased a cheap ring of fire resistance. "For your kindness to an old woman, I've bought you these," she said, giving the boy the necklace and the ring. "You can give the ring to your uncle and tell him it has been enchanted with a levitation spell, so if ever he needs to leave from high places, it will protect him. This soul gem is for you." "Thank you," said the boy, "but this is too kind of you." "Kindness has nothing to do with it," she answered quite honestly. "You see, I was in the Hall of Records at the Imperial Palace once or twice, and I read about you in the foretellings of the Elder Scrolls. You will be Emperor one day, my boy, the Emperor Pelagius Septim III, and with this soul gem to guide you, posterity will always remember you and your deeds." With those words, the old woman disappeared down an alley behind the Mages Guild. Pelagius looked after her, but he did not think to search behind a heap of stones. If he had, he would have found a tunnel under the city into the very heart of Castle Solitude, and if he had found his way there, he would have found past the shambling undead and the mouldering remains of a once grand palace, the bedroom of the Queen. In that bedroom he would find the Wolf Queen of Solitude in repose, listening to the sounds of her castle collapsing, and he would see a toothless grin growing on her face as she breathed her last. From the pen of Inzolicus, 2nd century sage, 3rd era 137. Potema Septim died after a month-long siege on her castle. While she lived, she had been the Wolf Queen of Solitude, daughter of the Emperor Pelagius II, wife of King Mantiarco, aunt of the Empress Quintira II, mother of Emperor Uriel III, and sister of the Emperors Antiochus and Sepphoris. At her death, Magnus appointed his son, Pelagius, as the titular head of Solitude, under guidance from the Royal Council. 3rd era 140. The Emperor Sepphoris Septim died after falling from his horse. His brother was proclaimed the Emperor Magnus Septim. 3rd era 141. Pelagius, King of Solitude, is recorded as occasionally eccentric in the imperial annals. He marries Catarish, Duchess of Wardenfell. 3rd era 145. The Emperor Magnus Septim dies. His son, who will be known as Pelagius the Mad, is coronated. Well, we've got only Mr. of Talara, 3 tomes, and that's it. Okay, let's do it. The Mystery of Talara, Princess Talara, The Mystery of Princess Talara, Part 3, by Mira Liketh. Gunnar Booth was leaving his favorite pub in Camlord, the Bracken Branch, when he heard someone calling his name. He was not the sort of a name. His was not the sort of a name that could be mistaken for another. He turned and saw Lord Errol, the royal battle mage from the palace, emerge from the darkness of the alley. "My lord," said Gunnar Booth with a pleasant smile. "I'm surprised to see you out this evening, Gunnar Booth," grinned Lord Errol with a most unpleasant smile. "I have not seen you and your master very much since the millennial celebration, but I understand you've been very busy. What I've been wondering is what you've been busy doing." "Protecting the imperial interests in Camlord is busy work, my lord, but I cannot imagine you would be interested in the minutiae of the ambassador's appointments." "But I am," said the battle mage, "especially as the ambassador has been acting most mysteriously, most undiplomatically lately. And I understand that he has taken one of the whores from the flower festival into his house. I believe her name is Gina." Gunnar Booth shrugged. "He's in love, I would imagine, my lord. It can make men act very strangely, so I'm sure you've heard before." "She's a most comely wench," laughed Lord Errol. "Have you noticed how much she resembles the late Princess Talara?" "I have only been in Camlord for 15 years, my lord. I never saw her late majesty." Now I could understand it if he had taken to writing poetry, but what man in love spends his days in the kitchens of the palace talking to old servants? That hardly sounds like molten passion to me, even based on my limited experience. Lord Errol rolled his eyes. "And what is this business he has now in... oh, what is the name of that village?" "Umbington," replied Narbuth, and immediately wished he hadn't. Lord Errol was too canny an actor to reveal it, but Narbuth knew at the pit of his stomach that the battle mage did not even know Lord Strail had left the capital. He had to get away to let the ambassador know that there was still a game to be carefully played. "He's not leaving for there until tomorrow. I believe it just to put a stamp on some deed that needs the imperial seal." "Is that all? How tedious for the poor fellow. I suppose I'll see him when he returns then." Lord Errol bowed. "Thank you for being so informative. Farewell." The moment the royal battle mage turned the corner, Norbuth leapt into his horse. He had drunk 1 or 2 ales too many, but he knew he must find his way to Umbington before Lord Errol's agents did. He galloped east out of the capital, hoping there were signs along the road. Seated on a tavern that smelled of mildew and sour beer, Lord Strail marveled at how the Emperor's agent, Lady Briziana, always found the most public of places for her most private of conferences. It was harvest time in Umbington, and all of the field hands were drinking away their meager wages in the noisiest of fashions. He was dressed appropriately for the venue, rough trousers and simple peasant's vest, but he still felt conspicuous. In comparison to his 2 female companions, he certainly was. The woman to his right was used to frequenting the low places of Daggerfall as a common prostitute. Lady Briziana to his left was even more clearly in her element. "Why, what name would you prefer I call you?" Lady Briziana asked solicitously. "I'm used to the name Gina, though that may have to change," was her reply. "Of course it may not. Gina the whore may be the name writ on my grave. I will see to it that there is no attempt on your life like that at the flower festival." Lord Strail frowned. "But without the Emperor's help, I won't be able to protect you forever. The only permanent solution is to capture those who would do you harm, and then to raise you to your proper station. Do you believe my story?" Gina turned to Lady Briziana. "I have been the Emperor's chief agent in High Rock for many years now, and I have heard few stranger tales. If your friend the ambassador hadn't investigated and discovered that what he has, I would have dismissed you outright as madwoman." Briziana laughed, forcing a smile onto Gina's face to match. "But now, yes, I do believe you. Perhaps that makes me the madwoman." "Will you help us?" asked Lord Trail simply. "It is a tricky business interfering in the affairs of the provincial kingdoms." Lady Brienne looked into the depths of her mug thoughtfully. "Unless there is a threat to the Empire itself, I find it is best not to meddle. What we have in your case is a very messy assassination that happened 20 years ago, and its aftermath. If His Imperial Majesty involves itself in every bloody hiccup in the succession in each of his 1,000 vassal kingdoms, he will never accomplish anything for the greater good of Tamriel." "I understand," murmured Gina. "When I remembered everything, who I was and what happened to me, I resolved to do nothing about it. In fact, I was leaving Camlorn and going back home to Daggerfall when I saw Lord Trail again. He was the one who began this quest to resolve this, not me. And when he brought me back, I only wanted to see my cousin to tell her who I was, but he forbade me." "It would have been too dangerous," growled Trail. "We still don't know yet the depths of the conspiracy. Perhaps we will never will. I'm sorry, I always find myself giving long explanations to short questions. When Lord Trail asked if I would help, I should have begun by saying yes." Lady Brienne laughed at the change in Lord Trail and Gina's expressions. "I will help you, of course, but for this to turn out well, you must accomplish two things to the Emperor's satisfaction. First, you must prove with absolute certainty who is the power behind this plot you've uncovered. You must get someone to confess. And secondly," said Lord Trail, nodding, "we must prove that this is a matter worthy of His Imperial Majesty consideration and not merely a minor local concern." Lord Trail, Lady Brienne, and the woman who called herself Gina discussed how to accomplish their goals for a few hours more. When it was agreed what had to be done, Lady Brienne took her leave to find her ally Prosicus. Trail and Gina set off to the west, toward Camlorn. It was not long after beginning their ride through the woods that they heard the sound of galloping hoofbeats far up ahead. Lord Trail unsheathed his sword and signaled for Gina to position her horse behind him. At that moment they were attacked on all sides. It was an ambush. 8 men armed with axes had been lying in wait. Lord Trail quickly yanked Gina from her house, pulling her behind him. He made a brief, deft motion with his hands. A ring of flame materialized around them and rushed outward, striking their assailants. The men roared in pain and dropped to their knees. Lord Trail jumped the horse over the closest one and galloped at full speed westward. "I thought you were an ambassador, not a mage," laughed Gina. "I still believe there are times for diplomacy," replied Lord Trail. The horse and rider they had heard before met them on the road. It was Gnorbuth. "Lord is the royal battle mage. He found out you two were in Umbington. With considerable ease, I might add." Lord Errol's voice boomed out of the woods. Gnorbuth, Gina, and Lord Trail scanned the dark trees, but they showed nothing. The battle mage's voices seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. "I'm sorry, my lord," groaned Gnorbuth. "I tried to warn you as soon as I could." "In your next life, perhaps you'll remember not to trust your plans to a drunkard," laughed Lord Errol. He had them in his sight and the spell was unleashed. Gnorbuth saw him first, by the light of the ball of fire that leapt from his fingertips. Later, Lord Errol was to wonder to himself what the fool had intended to do. Perhaps he was rushing forward to pull Lord Trail out of the path. Perhaps he was trying to flee the path of destruction and had simply moved left when he should have moved right. Perhaps, as unlikely as it seemed, he was willing to sacrifice himself to save his master. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. He got in the way. There was an explosion of energy that filled the night and an echoing boom that shook birds from the trees for a mile around. On the few square feet where Gnorbuth and his horse had stood was nothing but black glass. They had been reduced to less than vapor. Gina and Lord Trail were thrown back. Their horse, when it recovered its senses, galloped away as fast as it could. In the lingering, glowing aura of the spell's detonation, Lord Trail looked straight into the woods and into the wide eyes of the battle mage. "Damn," said Lord Errol, and began to run. The ambassador jumped to his feet and pursued. "That was an expensive use of magic even for you," said Lord Trail as he ran. "Don't you know well enough not to use ranged spells unless you are certain your target won't be blocked? I never thought that idiot Lord Errol was struck from behind and knocked to the wet forest floor before he had a chance to finish his lamentation. "It doesn't matter what your thought," said Lord Strail calmly, flipping the battle mage around and pinning his arms to the ground with his knees. "I'm not a battle mage, but I knew enough not to use my entire reserve on your little ambush. Perhaps it's a matter of philosophy. As a government agent, I feel inclined toward conservatism." "What are you going to do?" whimpered Lord Errol. "Gnorbooth was a good man, one of the best, and so I'm going to hurt you quite a lot." The ambassador made a slight movement and his hands began to glow brightly. "That's a certainty. How much more I'm going to hurt you after that depends on what you tell me. I want to hear about the former Duke of Olowin." "What do you want to know?" Lord Errol screamed. "Let's start with everything," replied Lord Strail with perfect patience. The Mystery of Princess Telara, Part 4 by Mira Licketh. Gina never saw the Emperor's agent, Lady Briziana, again, but she kept her promise. Prosicus, a knight blade in the service of the Empire, arrived at Lord Strail's house in disguise. She was an apt pupil, and within days he had taught what she needed to know. "It is a simple charm, not that sort of spell that could turn a raging Daedroth into a love-struck puppy," said Prosicus. "If you do or say anything that would normally anger or offend your target, the power will weaken. It will alter temporarily his perception of you, as spells of the School of Illusion do, but his feelings of respect and admiration for you must be supported by means of a charm of a less magical nature." "I understand," smiled Gina, thanking her tutor for the 2 spells of illusion he had taught her. The time had come to use her newfound skill. The Prostitutes' Guild House of Camlorn was a great palace in the affluent northern quarter of the city. Prince Cylon could have found his way there blindfolded or blind drunk as he often was. Tonight, however, he was only lightly inebriated and he resolved to drink no more. Tonight he was in the mood for pleasure, his kind of pleasure. "Where's my favorite Grigia?" he demanded of the guild mistress upon entering. "She's still healing from your appointment with her last week," she smiled serenely. "Most of the other women are in with clients as well, but I saved a special treat for you, a new girl, one you will certainly enjoy." The prince was guided to a sumptuously decorated suite of velvet and silk. As he entered, Gina stepped from behind the screen and cast her spell quickly, with her mind open to belief as Prosicus had instructed. It was hard to tell if it worked at first. The prince looked at her with a cruel smile and then, like sun breaking through clouds, and cruelty left. She could tell he was hers. He asked her name. "I'm between names right now," she teased. "I've never made love to a real prince before. I've never even been inside a palace. Is yours very big?" "It's not mine yet," he shrugged, "but someday I'll be king." "It would be wonderful to live in such a place," Gina cooed. "1,000 years of history, everything must be so old and beautiful. The paintings and books and statues and tapestries. Does your family hold on to all their old treasures?" "Yes, hoarded away with a lot of boring old junk in the archive rooms in the vaults. Please, may I see you naked now?" "First a little conversation, though you may feel free to disrobe whenever you like," said Gina. "I had heard there was an archive room, but it's quite hidden away. There's a false wall behind the family crypt," said the prince, gripping her wrist and pulling her towards him for a kiss. Something in his eyes had changed. "Your Highness, you're hurting my arm," Gina cried. "Enough talk, you bewitching whore," he snarled. Holding back a sharp jab of fear, Gina let her mind cool and perceptions whirl. As his angry mouth touched her lips, she cast the second spell she had learned her illusionist's mentor. The prince felt his flesh turn to stone. He remained frozen, watching Gina pull together her clothing and leave the room. The paralysis would only last for a few more minutes, but it was all the time she needed. The guild mistress had already left with all her girls, just as Gina and Lord Strail had told her to. They would tell her when it was safe to return. She had not even accepted any gold for her part in the trap. She said it was enough that her girls would not be tortured anymore by that most perverse and cruel prince. "What a terrible boy," thought Gina as she raised the hood over her cloak and raced through the streets towards Lord Strail's house. It is good that he will never be king. The following morning, the king and queen of Camlorn held their daily audience with various nobles and diplomats, a sparse gathering. The throne room was largely empty. It was a terribly dull way to begin the day. In between petitions, they yawned regally. "What has happened to all the interesting people?" the queen murmured. "Where's our precious boy?" "I've heard he was raging through the north quarter in search of some harlot who robbed him," the king chuckled fondly. "What a fine lad! And what of the royal battle mage? I've sent him to take care of delicate matter." The king knit his brow. "But that was nearly a week ago, and I haven't heard one word from him. It's somewhat troubling." "Indeed it is. Lord Errol should not be gone so long," the queen frowned. "What if a rogue sorcerer came and threatened us? Husband, don't laugh at me. That is why all the royal houses of High Rock keep their mage retainers close to their side, to protect their court from evil enchantments like the one that our poor emperor suffered so recently." "At the hand of his own battle mage," chuckled the king. "Lord Errol would never betray you like that, and you well know it. He has been in your employ since you were Duke of Holloway. To even make that comparison between he and Jagger Tharn, really." The queen waved her hands dismissively. "It is that sort of lack of trust that is ruining kingdoms all over Tamriel. Now Lord Strail tells me there's another man that's gone missing," mused the king. "The ambassador?" The queen shook her head. "No, he's here. He was desirous to visit the crypts and pay homage to your noble ancestors, so I directed him there. I can't think what's keeping him so long. He must be more pious than I thought." She was surprised to see the king rise up, alarmed. "Why, didn't you tell me?" Before she had a chance to reply, the subject of their conversation was coming through the open door to the throne room. On his arm was a beautiful fair-haired woman in a stately gown of scarlet and gold, worthy of the highest nobility. The queen followed her startled husband's gaze and was likewise amazed. "I had heard he was taken with one of the harlots from the flower festival, not a lady," she whispered. "Why, she looked remarkably like your daughter, the Lady Gilia." "That she does," the king gasped. "Or her cousin, the Princess Talara." The nobles in the room also whispered amongst themselves. Though few had been at court 20 years ago when the princess had disappeared, presumed murdered like the rest of the royal family, there were still a few elder statesmen who remembered. It was not only on the throne that the word Talara passed through the air like an enchantment. "Lord Strail, will you introduce us to your lady?" the queen asked with a polite smile. "In a moment, your highness, but I'm afraid I must first discuss pressing matters," Lord Strail replied with a bow. "Might I request a private audience?" The king looked at the imperial ambassador, trying to read into the man's expression. With a wave of his hand, he dismissed the assembled and had the doors shut behind them. No one remained in the audience room but the king, the queen, the ambassador, a dozen royal guards, and the mysterious woman. The ambassador pulled from his pocket a sheaf of old yellowed parchment. "Your highness, when you ascended the throne after your brother and his family were murdered, anything that seemed important, deeds and wills, were of course kept with the clerks and ministers. His entire incidental unimportant personal correspondence was sent to archive, which is standard protocol. This letter was among them. What is this all about, sir?" the king boomed. "What does it say?" "Nothing about you, your majesty. In truth, at the time of your majesty's ascension, no one reading it could have understood its significance. It was a letter to the emperor, the late king, your brother was penning at the time of his assassination, concerning a thief who had once been mage priest at the temple of Theat here in Camlorn. His name was Jagger Tharn." "Jagger Tharn?" the queen laughed nervously. "Why, we were just talking about him." Tharn had stolen many books of powerful and forgotten spells and lore about such artifacts as the Staff of Chaos, where it was hidden and how it could be used. News traveled slowly to westernmost High Rock, and by the time the king, your brother, had heard the emperor's new battle mage was a man named Jagger Tharn, many years had passed. The king had been writing a letter to warn the emperor of the treachery of his imperial battle mage. but it was never completed. Lord Strel held up the letter. It is dated on the day of his assassination, in the year 385. 4 years before Jagar Tharn betrayed his master and began the 10 years of tyranny of the Imperial Simulacrum. This is all very interesting, the king part, but what has it to do with me? The late king's assassination is now a matter of imperial concern, and I have a confession from your royal battle mage, Lord Errol. The king's face lost all color. You miserable worm, no man may threaten me. Neither you nor that whore nor that letter will ever see the light of day again. Guards! The royal guards unsheathed their blades and pressed forward. As they did so, there was a sudden shimmer of light, and the room was filled with imperial night blades, led by Prosicus. I had been there for hours, lurking invisible in the shadows. In the name of His Imperial Majesty Earl Septim VII, I arrest you, said Strel. The doors were opened, and the king and queen were led out, heads bowed. Gina told Prosicus where he would most likely find their son, Prince Cylon. The courtiers and nobles who had been in the audience chamber stared at the strange, solemn procession of their king and queen to their own royal prison. No one said a word. When at last a voice was heard, it startled all. The Lady Gilia had arrived at court. What is happening? Who dares to usurp the authority of the king and queen? Lord Strel turned to Prosicus. We would speak with the Lady Gilia alone. You know what needs to be done. Prosicus nodded and had the doors to the throne room closed once again. The courtiers pressed against the wood, straining to hear everything. Though they could not say it, they wanted an explanation almost as much as her ladyship did. Alright, the last book of this game, and we're done. The Mystery of Princess Talara, Part 5th, by Mariel Liketh. By what right do you arrest my father? Cried the Lady Gilia. What has he done? I arrest the King of Camlorn, the former Duke of Olwyn, by my right as an Imperial Commanding Officer and Ambassador, said Lord Strel, by the right of law of the Emperor of Tamriel, which supersedes all provincial royal authority. Hey, it's Peculiar Command 276. I really like a woman, don't I? Yeah, indeed. Well, at least I like its lore and the history concerning the previous Elder Scrolls series. After all, I'm going to play Skyrim, well, on the next stream, or after a few of them, or maybe after the next game if I decide to play the other game. So we need to more or less understand what's happening in this world. Alright, let's get on to this topic again. You're getting bad service, so sometimes the stream will pause, but you're still here. Glad to know it. Gina came forward and tried to put her hand on Gilia's arm, but she was coldly rebuffed. Quietly she sat down at the foot of the throne in the now empty audience chamber. This young lady came to me, having completely recovered her memory, but the story she told was beyond incredible. I simply couldn't believe it, said Lord Strel, but she was so convinced of it, I had to investigate. So I talked to everyone who was here at the palace 20 years ago to see if there could be any truth to it. Of course, at the time of the king and queen's murder and the princess's disappearance, there was a full inquiry made, but I had different questions to ask this time. Questions about the relationship between the two little cousins, Lady Gilia Reyes and the princess. I've told everyone over and over again I don't remember anything at all about that time in my life, said Gilia, tears welling up. I know you don't. There has never been a question in my mind that you witnessed a horrible murder and that your memory laughs at hers, said Lord Strel, gesturing toward Gina, are both very real. The story I heard from the servants and other people at the palace was that the little girls were inseparably close. There were no other playmates, and as the princess's place was to be close to her parents, so the little Lady Julia was always there as well. When the assassin came to murder the royal family, the king and queen were in their bedroom, and the girls were playing in the throne room. When my memory came back to me, it was like opening a sealed box, said Gina solemnly. Everything was so clear and detailed, like it all happened yesterday, not 20 years ago. I was on the throne playing Empress, and you were hiding behind the dais, pretending you were in a dungeon I had sent you to. A man I had never seen burst into the room from the royal bedchamber, his blade soaked in blood. He came at me, and I ran for my life. I remember starting to run for the days, but I saw your face frozen in fear, and I didn't want to lead him to you, so I ran for the window. We had climbed on the outside of the castle before, just for fun. That was one of the first memories that came back to me when I was holding onto that cliff. You and I on the castle wall, and the king calling up to me, telling me how to get down. But that day I couldn't hold on. I was trembling so much I just fell and landed in the river. I don't know if it was entirely the horror of what I had seen, or that combined with the impact of the fall and the coldness of the water, but everything just went blank in my mind. When I finally pulled myself out of the river, many miles away, I had no idea who I was, and so it stayed, Gina smiled, until now. So you are the Princess Telara, cried Julia. Let me explain further before she answers that, because the simple answer would just confuse you as it did me, said Lord Strail. The assassin was caught before he managed to escape the palace. In truth, he had to know he was going to be caught. He confessed immediately to the murders of the royal family. The princess, he said, he had thrown out the window to her death. A servant down below heard the scream and saw something fly past his window, so he knew it to be true. It was not for several hours that little Lady Julia was found by her nursemaid Ramke hiding behind the dais, coated with dust, shivering with fear, and unable to speak at all. Ramke was very protective of you, Straight said, nodding to Julia. She insisted on putting you to your room right away, and sent word to the Duke of Following that the royal family was dead, and that his daughter had witnessed the murders but survived. Hey, Kirikinari. Rare content. Alright, you're welcome. And welcome to my stream, but this is a bit... well, this moment is, you know, sentimental for me, because it's the last stream of this game. I'm just reading this book and that's it. I've completed the game. Alright, let's continue on the book. I'm beginning to remember a little of that, said Julia, wonderingly. I remember lying on bed with Ramke comforting me. I was so muddled and I couldn't concentrate. I remember I just wanted it all to be played as time still. I don't know why. And then I remember being bundled up and taken to that asylum. Привет. It will come back to you soon, Gina smiled. I promise that's how I began to remember. I just caught one detail and the whole flood began. That's it, Julia began to sob in frustration. I don't remember anything else except confusion. Oh, I also remember Daddy not even looking at me as I was taken away, and I remember not caring about that or anything else. Спасибо, что нажала на кнопку «Последовать». Надеюсь, тебе понравится контент, который я буду генерировать. It was a confusing time for all, so particularly so for little girls. Especially little girls who went through what you too did, said Lord Strail sympathetically. From what I understand, as soon as he received the message from Ramke, the Duke left his palace at Halloween, gave orders for you to be sent to a private sanitarium until you'd recovered from your ordeal, and set to work with his private guard torturing the assassin for information. When I heard that no one but the Duke and his personal guard saw the assassin after he gave his initial confession. and that no one was present but the Duke and his guards when the assassin was killed trying to escape. I thought that very significant. I spoke with Lord Errol, who I knew was one of those present, and I had to bluff him, pretending I had more evidence than I did. I got the reaction I was hoping for, though it was a dangerous gambit. At last, he confessed to what I already knew to be true. The assassin, Lord Strail paused and reluctantly met Julia's eyes, had been hired by the Duke of Olwyn to kill the royal family, including the princess as heir, so that the crown might be passed to him and to his children. Julia stared at Lord Strail aghast. My father, the assassin, had been told that once the Duke had him in custody, he would be paid and a prison break would be arranged. The thug picked the wrong time to be greedy and try to get more gold. The Duke decided that it would be cheaper to silence him, so he murdered him then and there, so the man would never tell anyone what really happened. Lord Strail shrugged. No tragic loss as far as murders go. In a few years' time you returned from the sanitarium a little shaken but back to normal, except for a complete absence of memory about your childhood. And in that time the former Duke of Olwyn had taken his brother's place as the King of Camlorn. It was no small maneuver. No, said Julia quietly, he must have been very busy. He remarried and had another child. No one ever came to visit me in the sanitarium but Ramke. If he had visited and seen you, said Gina, this story might have turned out very differently. What do you mean? Asked Julia. This is the most amazing part, said Lord Strail. The question has long been whether Gina is the Princess Talara. When her memory returned, and she told me what she remembered, I put several pieces of evidence together. Consider these facts. The two of you look remarkably alike now after 20 years of living very different lives, and as little girls and constant playmates you looked nearly identical. At the time of the assassination, the murderer, who had never been there before, only saw one girl on the throne, who he assumed to be his quarry. The woman who found Lady Julia was her nursemaid, Ramke, a creature of unstable mind and fanatical devotion to her charge. The type would never accept the possibility that her beloved little girl had been the one who disappeared. The nursemaid was the only single person who knew both Princess Talara and the Lady Julia who visited you while you were in the sanitarium. Finally, said Lord Strail, consider the fact that when you returned to court from the sanitarium, 5 years had passed, and you had grown from a child to a young lady. You looked familiar, but not quite the same as your family remembered you, which is only natural. I don't understand, cried the poor girl, her eyes wide, because she did understand. Her memory was falling together like a terrible flood. Let me explain it like this, said her cousin, wrapping her in her arms. I know who I am now. My real name is Julia Reyes. That man who was arrested was my father, the man who murdered the king, your father. You are the Princess Talara. Whoa, that's a nice story. Well, this is it. Ну что ж, теперь все. Все книги прочитаны в игре. Все данжены пройдены, которые можно было открыть. Количество золота примерно такое же, как у торговой гильдии, которая строила дороги в Вестмарше. Да, я надеюсь, что буду еще беглее говорить, потому что, вообще говоря, немножко подтормаживаю. В Skyrim есть интерактивная книга, игра с выборами и развитием ситуации. Круто. Это интересно. Мне нравится, когда в играх проработан лор. Это очень радует. Это в этой игре это несколько разбавляет то, что здесь очень много контента, который повторяется. То есть здесь большая часть всех данженов, они примерно одинаковые. То есть у них разная карта, то есть согласно Википедии они были по-разному отрисованы и по-разному спроектированы, в том числе разными людьми. Но, к сожалению, в них именно наполненность сюжетная низкая. Здесь есть куча локаций, в которых есть квесты, и это как раз радует, и то, что это связано со всем этим лором, который мы недавно дочитали в течение последних 2 стримов. Фактически мы только это и делали, что 2 последних стрима читали. Skyrim, конечно, буду. Считается легендарная игра. Я сейчас немного оцениваю, как я проходил эту игру, потому что начиналась она довольно, я бы сказал, легкомысленно. То есть нам всучили амулет, и мы принялись исследовать этот мир направо и налево. И это потрясающая игра. У нее есть свои недостатки, она, конечно, несколько старовата, но итого это классная игра. Нашла название Колеб и дракон. Угу. Стоп. Такое ощущение, что здесь что-то такое было. Скорее всего, она валяется где-то в имперском городе. О Норде, которого просили сразить дракона. Только не рассказывай дальше, мы спойлеры не любим. Единственное, что... Которого попросили сразить дракона. Что-то здесь возникало, только мне кажется, что оно возникало здесь отдаленно, то есть, ну, буквально упоминанием. Как будто вот это будет сделано в следующей книге, если оно есть в Скайриме, это классно. По-моему, Dancing Fire. Вот это вот. Нет, пардон. Это про товарища Скотти. Того самого, который состоял в этой торговой гильдии, которая строила дороги в Вестмарш. Ну, теперь у меня примерно столько же денег, сколько у этой гильдии, поэтому фактически мини-задача выполнена. Так. Ну что ж, несколько грустно расставаться с этой игрой, но теперь здесь все. Я понимаю, я же не играл еще в Skyrim. Там прям выборы, от выбора нужно листать на нужную страницу. Мне очень понравилось, что здесь есть основная линия. Она не очень длинная, но здесь достаточно сторонних квестов, чуть ли не за каждую гильдию. Единственное, что я не стал выполнять, это квесты за Темное Братство, поскольку они требуют убийства невинных людей, ну, по крайней мере, они исходно выглядят как невинные. Может быть, у Темного Братства есть определенные причины их убивать, но первого чувака, которого они попросили убить, ну, с виду он не похож на человека, которого требуется убить ради общего блага. Morrowind нет, не играл. К сожалению, не играл. Фактически, когда... Тут очень мощная линия. Я видел у них локации. 2. В одну меня не пускали, потому что нужно стать их членом. А вторая локация — это их спрятанные Это их убежище спрятанное. Я его нашел, но меня туда не пускает. Так, но если оно очень мощное, то можно попробовать выполнить ее, пока мне делают вот эту вот драконовую броню. Я еще не делал некоторые квесты, потому что мне не нравится, что нужно делать с разными персонажами. Тем более, что здесь надо было убить носорога, ой, единорога, для Хирсин. И этот единорог — это единственное ездовое животное, которое сразу мое. Я его отвел в отдельное стойло, и теперь это мое ездовое животное. Так что здесь можно кататься на единороге. И так как странное стечение обстоятельств с этим единорогом, если он начинает сражаться со мной против каких-то врагов и подбегают стражи, то стражи почему-то начинают мочить бедного единорога. У него проблемы с законом, прямо как у моего персонажа. Так что это, я считаю, нет смысла убивать. Не хочешь спойлерить, но цепляет за живое. В Скайриме немного лучше мотивирует вступление. Тут, конечно, немного кровожадно, тоже долго сомневалась. Да? Ну, здесь, да, здесь они требуют убийства человека, о котором ты ничего не знаешь. И, судя по всему, он сделал что-то абсолютно невинное. Ну, то есть, если он провинился в чем-то, то оно совсем ничего не значит с глобальной точки зрения. Хорошо. While sleeping, I was visited by Lucien Lachance, a representative for the Assassin's Guild known as the Dark Brotherhood. He said that if I wish to join his family, I must go to the inn of Ill Omen and find a man named Rufio and kill him. If I simply leave Rufio alone, Lachance will never visit me again. Ну что ж, мы разгрузили книги, в принципе, можно попробовать. Единственное, что уже несколько поздновато. И завтра рано вставать. Ну что ж, спасибо за наводку. Значит, это не последний стрим этой игры. Большое спасибо за наводку. У меня московское время, мне просто рано вставать. Хочется посмотреть прохождение, когда буду играть. Ориентировочно я начинаю чаще всего с 9 вечера. Иногда раньше начинаю. Завтра в 9 ориентировочно, да? Из всех стримов в среднем я в 9 начинаю. То есть так уж получается. И тебе спасибо. Особенно за наводку, потому что я думал, что этот квест совсем злодейский, а если там мощная сюжетная линия, то это будет здорово. Что ж, всем спасибо, что сегодня были со мной. Надеюсь, что вам понравилось. Если вам понравилось и вы еще не нажали на кнопку «Следовать», и если хотите, пожалуйста, нажмите. Я желаю всем спокойной ночи и до следующего раза. В следующий раз мы будем выполнять квест Темного Братства. О чем я раньше не задумывался, но почему, как говорится, нет. And that concludes our stream for tonight. I wish you a good night and stay tuned for the next episode of The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. Next time we'll play again against the whole world for the Dark Brotherhood, as if I had a lead that this quest line is very interesting. Yet again, I wish you a good night and until next time. Bye!